Hey guys, tonight we're taking a quiet walk through a city that once forgot to surrender. A place where time stretched so long that the siege itself fell asleep. You'll see the walls high worn and mossy rising from a coastal mist. You'll hear the faint rustle of linen flags that no longer mean much. This is not a story of conquest or glory. It's about what happens when everyone simply forgets the war is still going on. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of an ancient fortress, its stones older than most languages, its silence thicker than smoke. A breeze carries the smell of brine and fennel from the sea. The only sound is the slow creak of a rope on a pulley as a small bell sways above the gate. It's chipped, green with age, and still polished by countless fingertips. That bell once signaled the start of every attack. But nobody remembers which day the attacks were meant to stop. The records. Those few that remain say the siege began during a minor trade dispute. Two merchant families argued over tariffs, and by some absurd chain of pride, the city sealed its gates. A small army camped outside, expecting surrender within a week. That was 200 years ago. Inside the walls, life went on. Children were born. Apprentices grew old. Bakers kept baking. They were told, perhaps, that the enemy still waited beyond the moat. The city council posted guards at the towers and issued schedules for rationing, strict at first, then ceremonial. No one wanted to be the first to say, maybe it's over. Outside, the besiegers did much the same. Soldiers built huts, then houses. Their children learned to fish in the moat. They'd shout jokes up to the battlements, and sometimes the guards laughed back. A kind of rhythm set in part hostility, part habit. You wander the empty streets now. The cobblestones are uneven, softened by centuries of footsteps. Faded banners hang like wilted flowers from balconies. Someone has painted dates on the wall year after year, stretching so far that you wonder how long the chroniclers kept count before running out of space. A cat watches you from a windowsill, its eyes catching the light like small lanterns. Somewhere far off, the chipped bronze bell rings again. One soft note, then silence. You pass through what a military checkpoint. The booth still holds a dusty ledger. Daily provisions, third week of the siege. The ink trails off, halfway through a list of barley sacks. A historian once tried to estimate the total food sent through these gates, but no number could account for the centuries. By the end, the merchants on both sides had forgotten who paid whom. It's strange to think about. A war without battles, soldiers without enemies. There are stories that, at one point, a scholar from the outside world arrived to negotiate peace. The people inside politely declined, explaining they couldn't surrender because no one had officially declared victory. The scholar left confused and mildly amused, taking a loaf of bread as a souvenir. Even now, the air tastes faintly of salt and ash. You imagine the sounds that must have filled these streets long ago, the rhythmic clang of armor, the murmured prayers of guards before dawn, the soft scrape of sandals on stone. Then you notice something else. The way moss curls over the cracks of the wall like gentle handwriting. Every layer of green seems to say, time doesn't mind your sieges. When the moonlight hits the battlements, you see carvings, rough initials, small sketches. A child's drawing of a horse, a name followed by a heart. The soldiers, bored of waiting, left traces of themselves in stone. Archaeologists once found a dice set carved from olive pits here. On one, someone had etched the word tomorrow. Maybe it was meant as a joke, maybe a promise. There's a legend that in the fort's final century, the guards began each morning by ringing that same bell, not to warn of attack, but to signal breakfast. The sound was so gentle it became the city's alarm clock. You close your eyes and hear it now, the faint clink echoing down the corridor of time. You think about how easy it is for a ritual to lose its meaning and how sometimes that's a kind of peace in itself. It said that when the last commander died, no one replaced him. The soldiers simply kept watch because it felt wrong not to. They repaired the walls even when they no longer cracked. They kept sharpening spears that no longer gleamed. The city and the camp became mirror images, each convinced they were still. Waiting for the other to move first, as you wander through the gatehouse, you touch the cold metal of the bell. It hums faintly, as though remembering its purpose. Someone long ago tried to mend the chip with solder that's now turned pale green. The historians still debate whether the siege ended naturally or whether both sides simply forgot the idea of war altogether. There's no treaty, no final entry. In any record, the last mention in an archive reads, "Rain delayed operations. Bread excellent today." That's how the war story ends, with bread and weather. You stand now on the parapet, looking out across what was once a battlefield. But the fields are golden with barley, and the trenches have become irrigation canals. A shepherd walks where archers once stood. His flock grazes peacefully around the old siege engines, their wooden arms sagging like tired limbs that you can almost imagine what it felt like being one of those watchmen at the end. A little bored, a little proud, a little afraid to stop. You picture the quiet moment each evening when the bell would ring, signaling that nothing had happened yet again, and in that sound, the chipped, hesitant chime, you sense what this whole forgotten siege was really about. Not war, not peace, but the stubborn comfort of routine. The sea wind rises. You can smell salt again and hear the distant creak of that same rope. It's as if the city itself is breathing, dreaming of the day it might finally wake tomorrow. You think maybe someone will surrender, or maybe they already did, long ago, in the softest possible way, by simply continuing to live. Morning comes to the city that forgot to surrender, though it's difficult to tell where the dawn begins, and the routine continues. The first thing you notice is the smell, warm, yeasty, faintly sweet. Bread. It drifts through the narrow streets, like a promise wrapping around your senses before the sun even finds the rooftops somewhere inside the walls. An old baker stirs dough in a wooden trough. His hands, powdered with flour and thyme, move automatically, fold, press, fold again. He doesn't look toward the towers where guards once stood. He doesn't need to. He knows they're there, even if their watch is ceremonial now. Every morning, he bakes an extra dozen loaves, just in case someone from outside sends a runner for supplies. That you follow the scent through an arched corridor where market stalls still stand in a lazy row. The signs have faded into soft pastel ghosts of themselves. Figs and spices, lantern repairs, pickled eels. Few people trade in these early hours. Yet baskets are still laid out filled, not with money, but tokens carved from wood or shell. For fairness, one merchant mutters to you. Though fairness seems a long-forgotten notion here, beyond the wall. You can hear similar sounds, hammering, laughter, the besiegers' camp, if you can still call it that, has long since become a small town. A few families cross the moat each week to exchange goods, the guards nodding them through as if it's perfectly normal. Some of the soldiers outside were once children born within the city walls, their parents having slipped away in search of better air. The historians write that in the 3rd century of this so-called siege. Both sides kept nearly identical schedules. The bells, those same chipped bronze ones, would ring at dawn, signaling bread making both inside and out. Then came the marketplace hours, the water carrying, the quiet hum of daily chores. At sunset, candles were lit simultaneously in both camps, as if rehearsing peace without declaring it. You watch a woman carry baskets of bread toward the main gate. Her hair is pinned with a small seashell, a rare luxury, meaning she's from the outer quarter near the docks. 2 guards nod to her as she passes. She doesn't flinch or hurry. She sets her baskets just inside the threshold, and moments later, a boy from the enemy side takes them, leaving behind a pouch of ground salt and return. It's almost comedic how carefully both sides maintain the illusion of separation. The same bread baked twice, the same market mirrored through the gate. The siege long ago became a duet, each note answered by its echo, and yet there's a tenderness in it. You can feel it in the way people greet each other with that quiet, Familiar humor reserved for neighbors who can't quite admit their friend's an elderly guard leans against the parapet and squints into the pale sunlight. His helmet is too. Big, his spear blunted from decades of polishing. It's market day, he says to you with a grin, so I'll have to pretend to search their carts. You ask him what he's searching for. Oh, he says, contraband happiness. Then he laughs softly to himself. The smell of baking intensifies as the ovens are opened. The bread is round, flat, a little smoky on the bottom. The recipe hasn't changed since the first year of the siege. No eggs, no milk, just grain and patience. There's a superstition that as long as that bread is made, the city will never fall. One baker outside the walls once wrote in a letter, "We do not bake for the soldiers. We bake for the waiting." That letter still exists, pressed between pages of an old archive. Its edges browned and delicate as autumn leaves. You take a loaf and tear it open. The crust cracks softly. Steam curls upward, carrying that gentle, life-sustaining scent. The taste is simple, warm, slightly sour, but after a moment you sense something richer beneath it. A memory of calm, a promise of continuation. As you eat, you hear the bell ring again. The same chip tone, uneven, but soothing. It's a sound that marks not alarm, but agreement. The rhythm of peace disguised as procedure. You glance toward the horizon where the besiegers' camp hums faintly. There's movement, a line of carts approaching the moat. Not soldiers now, but merchants, tailors, children, tugging at the wheels. One cart carries bundles of wool dyed, in shades of amber and rose. They'll trade for salt and herbs grown inside the city gardens. Nobody calls it trade. They call it exchange of necessities. It said that once a visiting monk tried to end the charade. He walked through the gate with arms raised, shouting, "You are one people." The guards thanked him politely and offered him bread before escorting him back out. He never returned, but his diary noted, "I could not tell which side was besieged." He walked past a fountain where pigeons flutter lazily. The water trickles over marble etched with old war mottos, now eroded into nonsense. Children play nearby, tossing pebbles into the water. One pebble hits the bronze bell's rope, making it chime faintly. The sound mixes with laughter and footsteps and a low murmur of bargaining in the marketplace. Someone has begun playing a lute soft, absent-minded. A tune that seems to know where it's going, but never arrives. You find yourself swaying, lulled by the rhythm of it, by the unspoken peace that has lasted longer than any treaty. And yet, in one small corner of your mind, a question lingers. What happens when someone stops baking, when the bell rusts silent? Will the illusion hold, or will the city remember the war it forgot? You catch sight of the old bronze bell again through an alleyway, its green patina gleaming faintly in the afternoon light. The same one from the gate, identical bells echoing each other from both sides. Their tone slightly different but harmonious, like two hearts beating out of sync yet somehow in rhythm. The smell of bread follows you as you leave the market. Warmth on the breeze, crust flaking between your fingers. You imagine those first bakers huddled in fear, kneading dough while listening for catapults. And then their grandchildren, and there's, until the sound of kneading replaced the sound of drums. The air cools as evening drifts in. You hear distant singing, something wordless, like a lullaby passed between generations who no longer remember its words. You turn once more toward the gate, half expecting to see an army. Instead, you see a pair of bakers exchanging baskets, nodding silently as they trade. A siege without surrender. A truce without end. And, above it all, the faint, comforting sound of that chipped bronze bell marking another day gone peacefully by. Tomorrow they'll bake again. And the world, for a few quiet hours, will remain perfectly, beautifully unchanged. Rain drizzles through the gaps in the old stone walls by the time you wake again. It's the soft, parchment-colored kind of rain that never soaks, just lingers. The air smells faintly of ink and smoke, the scent of writing by candlelight. You find yourself inside what was once the city's scriptorium, a long hall lined with scrolls and tablets. Most of the shelves are empty now. but a few bundles remain, tied with ribbons the color of faded blood oranges. Each is swollen with moisture, the ink ghosting through the paper like bruised veins. You pick one up gently. The first line begins, in a careful, looping hand, to my dearest brother outside the walls. So that's what this place is, an archive of messages never meant for history, only for each other. Thousands of notes exchanged during the siege. Some were official dispatches, reports on rations, on weather, on how long the grain would last. Others are different. You open one at random and find a recipe for plum jam, annotated with a shy heart. Another begins as a tactical order and ends as a poem about sunrise. You can almost imagine it. The runners slipping between gates at dawn, delivering bread in one hand and folded paper in the other. A city divided by walls, but joined by handwriting. Drop of rain hits the page you're holding, smudging an old name. You can't tell if it's a soldier's or a lover's. Scholars who studied these letters centuries later notice something curious. After the first few years of the siege, the tone of the messages changed. Military reports grew increasingly polite, even affectionate. Orders became requests. Requests became pleasantries. Eventually, someone began decorating the margins with doodles, birds, moons, tiny caricatures of guards. The war had turned into correspondence, and people of the city began to keep penmanship contests. A clean script for a clean conscience, one monk wrote, perhaps only half in jest. On the outer side, the besiegers did the same, competing to see who could write with the steadiest hand while standing in the rain. You picture it now. A courier from the outside camp, jogging through the drizzle, holding a sealed letter wrapped in oiled silk. He knocks politely on the city gate, hands it over, and waits for a reply. Inside, a scribe unrolls the parchment, dips his quill, and writes something back perhaps, not even reading the message fully. Just continuing the ritual. No one knows when these letters began to include jokes, or when the jokes turned to gossip. But by the 2nd century of the siege, correspondence had become a form of community theater. A play written by both sides, one reply at a time. You pick up a longer scroll 20, 30 exchanges between two names, Captain Tarn of the watch and Lieutenant Surratt of the encampment. The early messages are terse, clipped, but by the 5th note, they're discussing music, bread, and a stray cat that wandered between camp stock. Then there's this line, written in the cramped script of the lieutenant. Your cat now sleeps by our fire. We have named her Treaty. A few pages later, the captain responds, Treaty has kittens. May they inherit our patience. You can't help but smile. It's a tender, achingly human. A siege reduced to co-parenting stray cats. When you walk further into the hall, you find a corner filled with fragments too damaged to read. The ink has run. The paper has flaked away. Only bits of words remain. Moonlight, bread, laugh, still waiting. They look less like sentences and more like memories trying to reassemble themselves. Some historians argue that the letter system began as espionage, that coded messages were hidden inside everyday chatter. Others believe it was never about secrets, but about staying sane. The debate continues, but the truth likely lies somewhere in between. Maybe these letters were both. Love and survival disguised as bureaucracy.u on roll. Another note. This one is written in faint red ink that's nearly disappeared. We hear your bell at dawn. It comforts us. We ring ours back. That line catches you. It ties the morning bread from the market to this quiet exchange. You imagine the two bells calling to each other through fog, one inside, one outside like friends, separated by time. And there, tucked behind a loose brick, you find a final surprise, a folded scrap, sealed with wax, shaped like a tiny flower. You break it open carefully. The handwriting is delicate, uncertain. When the siege ends, we should still write. Perhaps letters are better than peace. You stare at it for a while, feeling the weight of that thought. Maybe peace was never a moment to arrive at, but something written into being, one word at a time. The rain deepens outside, drumming softly against the window panes. You can smell damp parchment and candle soot. It's oddly comforting. The smell of patience, of stories kept safe even when forgotten. You notice one quill left on a table. Its nib is broken, but its feathers still gleam silver in the light. Someone must have used it to write those last few letters before the ink ran out. You tuck it gently into your pocket. Maybe it will come up later, a quiet reminder that words outlast weapons. When you step outside again, the sound of the bells echoes faintly through the mist, two tones overlapping. The cities and the camps, calling and answering, just as those letters once did. You can almost hear Captain Tarrant's voice, calm and amused. Your cat still wanders near the gate. She doesn't choose sides, and perhaps neither did. Anyone else thought the rain continues to fall, not heavy, not loud, just steady enough to sound like parchment being turned. You wake to birdsong soft, scattered notes weaving through the morning air like threads of light. The siege has stretched on for centuries, and yet, when you look over the battlements now, it doesn't look like a battlefield at all. It looks like a garden. Vines crawl up the stone ramparts. The once feared trenches below are filled with herbs, mint, thyme, and lavender waving gently in the wind. You can smell them, sharp and green, cut through with the faint sweetness of damp soil. Someone has built a wooden gate across one of the old moats, turning it into a quiet bridge. A sparrow lands nearby, pecking at the seeds someone left along the wall. You follow its gaze down to a patch of marigolds planted between two catapults, long since surrendered to rust. Their wooden arms droop like weary shoulders. Beyond them, rows of lettuce and beans stretch in neat squares where archers once stood. It's said that during the 2nd century of the siege, food became less a matter of survival and more of artistry, with the blockade long irrelevant trade. Moving freely through neutral bakers and traders, people began experimenting. Gardeners became herbalists. Soldiers turned into growers. The war became an exercise in landscaping. You descend a spiral staircase that smells of damp moss and find yourself in what was once an armory. The racks that used to hold spears now cradle shovels and watering cans. A cracked barrel of arrowheads sits beside a basket of tulip bulbs. Someone has drawn faces on the bulbs and charcoal small smiles, wide eyes. A gentle joke that must have brightened some long ago morning. When the first flowers bloomed here, the chronicles say, the besiegers thought it was a trick. Scouts reported enemy movement of a vegetative nature. Within weeks, both sides were planting first for food, then for beauty. It became a silent contest. Who could make the brighter field? The winner, of course, was the bees, and you can hear them now, a low, steady hum that fills the courtyard like music. You walk through rows of chamomile and rosemary, brushing your fingers along their leaves. The smell clings to your hands, warm and comforting. One soldier's diary, What Little Survives, describes how they brewed tea from these herbs during the long, quiet afternoons. Mint for courage, thyme for patience, chamomile for surrender. The line was crossed out later. As if someone thought better of it, you pause beside a small patch of mint growing between the cracks and the flagstones. Its green looks impossibly vivid against the gray stone. You pick a sprig and roll it gently between your fingers. The scent bursts out, cool and clean. Somewhere, a memory surfaces of a lonely sentry who planted this mint decades ago, one of the last. Men still standing guard when everyone else had gone home for supper. That mint will appear again later. In a story about forgetting, though, you don't know that yet. For now, it's just a smell that stays with you. Something sharp enough to keep you anchored in this soft, slow dream dot near the garden center. A group of children tends a circular patch of wildflowers. They hum tunelessly as they work, passing a small watering jug from one to another. One of them, a girl with an apron stitched from an old flag, looks up and grins. You want to see the piece, Lulu? She asks, and leads you to a shaded corner, where tall white blooms stand like sentinels. These came from outside, she explains proudly. They traded for seeds. We gave them onions. You ask her who they are, and she shrugs. The people beyond the wall, I guess. They're nice. One of them taught me how to prune properly. It's hard to tell whether she's describing The besiegers are just the neighboring village now grown around the encampment. Perhaps it no longer matters. You sit by the edge of the moat, now more of a reflective pond. The surface is dotted with lily and a few fallen petals. Frogs croak softly beneath the waterline, and dragonflies dart through slivers of sunlight. A gust of wind stirs the bell rope on the tower, and you hear its faint, familiar note. It sounds less like warning now, more like invitation. An old gardener passes by, balancing a basket of herbs. His tunic bears faint traces of a soldier's insignia, long faded to pale gold. He catches your eye and smiles. "It's funny," he says. "When I was a boy, they told me to defend this wall. Now I feed it." You ask if anyone still drills. "Still pretends to guard the gates?" He laughs. "Oh, sometimes. For the tourists." The word makes you blink. Tourists. You realize what he means? Travelers from beyond, who come to see the city that never surrendered, who bring seeds and stories instead of weapons. Every spring, the old gardener continues. Someone plants something new. We don't remember why the war started, but we remember what grew afterward. That seems more important. As he walks away, you see that he leaves behind tiny clay markers shaped like bells beside each plant. Perhaps a tribute to the old rituals. Perhaps just a superstition. You sit in the quiet for a while, letting the sound settle around you. Bees, water, the faint creak of the garden gate. The siege, it seems, has become a kind of gentle choreography, each season marking time, each bloom a soft defiance against forgetting. You glance at the sprig of mint still in your hand. Its scent is stronger now, carried by the breeze that flows through the courtyard. Maybe this is what peace smells like, not the absence of conflict, but the mingling of earth and patience. Somewhere beyond the wall, a child laughs, answered by another from within. You can't tell whose voice belongs to which side. It doesn't matter. They sound the same. And as you walk back toward the tower, the chipped bronze bell rings again. 3 slow notes, irregular but sweet. You imagine its sound floating over the gardens, across the moat, into the camp beyond. A peaceful siege? A city that forgot to surrender, and instead remembered to grow. Dawn arrives without ceremony. No horn, no drum, no command shouted from a tower. Just the slow brightening of a gray sky and the distant sound of a gull. You lie half awake in the cool air, listening to the quiet murmur of the city below. Somewhere, a rooster calls late, as if it too has lost track of the centuries. The old bell hangs above you in the gatehouse arch. Its once bright bronze is the color of seaweed now, mottled with green and black. The rope sways in the breeze, whispering against the stone. For as long as anyone remembers, the day began with that sound, the bell marking the start of an attack. That never came. But this morning, it's silent. You wait, counting breaths. The air feels thick with something expectation, perhaps, or the absence of habit. Below, the market is slow to stir. No carts rolling over cobblestones yet, no laughter, no calls of bakers or traders. The silence hums with a strange weight. And then you notice it, the trumpet. Or rather, what's left of one. A rusted coil of brass, bent at the mouthpiece, leaning against the parapet. Dew beads on its surface like tiny pearls. You lift it carefully. It's lighter than you expect, and when you blow gently into it, it gives only a faint sigh. A ghost of a note. It said that once upon a time, the siege was kept in rhythm by ritual bells and trumpets, horns and drums. Not to inspire, but to reassure. The morning trumpet meant, yes, we're still here. The evening bell replied, so are we? For centuries, the city and the camp lived by that duet. And then, one day, no one knows when, no one wrote it down, the trumpet didn't sound. Perhaps its player grew old and forgot. Perhaps the brass corroded too far. Perhaps someone simply decided it was unnecessary. Whatever the reason, the silence lingered. And the next morning, no one thought to break it. You walk through the tower's upper chamber, where light filters through cracks in the wall. Dust motes float like tiny suns. On a table sits a logbook, open to its final entry. Bell sounded. Bread good. Trumpet delayed. Nothing more. The ink fades halfway through the line. As though the scribe never returned, you imagine the confusion of that first quiet morning, the guards waiting for the sound that didn't come, glancing at each other, uncertain whether to act or not. The baker still kneading dough, pausing briefly before continuing. The children on the wall looking out toward the camp beyond, waiting for their echo, and then gradually everyone accepting the silence. One day became two, two became a week, a month, a year. The ritual faded into memory, the trumpet into ornament. The siege slipped another step closer to myth. You find yourself smiling. There is something gentle about it, a city collectively deciding not to notice the absence of war music. A victory of inattention. Outside, the sky has brightened to the color of old parchment. The market begins to stir at last. A dog barks and a pair of traders roll a cart across the bridge. You follow them down, past a fountain rimmed with ivy. The air smells of damp stone and early bread, of mint and smoke. A small crowd has gathered near the gate. In the center stands an elderly woman with a basket of white lilies, the same kind grown in the garden trenches. She raises one flower, high as if to offer it to the morning. Then she places it beside the old trumpet on the parapet. Someone begins to hum a low, simple tune, the kind that could have been sung by soldiers long ago. Others join in quietly. It's not a song of triumph or mourning, just a sound to fill. The silence left by the missing horn. And then you notice something. The bell, though unmoving, catches the light at just the right angle. Its reflection dances on the wall, bright and trembling. It looks for a moment like the bell is ringing again, its light carrying the sound that no one made. You close your eyes. The rhythm of it settles deep in your chest, like a second heartbeat. The historians still argue about this moment, if it truly happened, or if it's just a tale repeated until it became true. They call it the morning without sound, when both sides realized the war had ended because no one could remember how to begin it again. The besiegers, seeing no movement from the walls, supposedly packed their tents within the year. Some moved into nearby villages, others traded goods in the market they'd once threatened. The city gates were never officially opened, they simply stopped being closed. And that trumpet, it remained where you see it now, rusting softly against the stone. A reminder that not all endings need announcement. You take one last look at it. The dew has dried, leaving faint mineral rings across its surface. When you touch it, your fingertips come away tinged with green as you step back. The breeze carries a new sound, laughter, clattering plates, the shuffle of life returning to motion. The day resumes, as it always does. The silence breaks not with a horn, but with the hum of ordinary things. And just before you leave, you hear a faint note not from the trumpet, but from the mint leaves in your pocket, brushing together with a whisper like a sigh. It smells fresh again, as though reminding you of that sentry who planted it long ago. In the end, you realize the city didn't surrender. It simply stopped listening for permission to live. The bell remained still. The trumpet rusted, the people laughing. The siege long over, but the peace gentle, accidental, still ringing invisibly through the air. And so, tonight, as you drift towards sleep, imagine yourself walking those quiet walls once more. The air cool and salted, the scent of mint and bread still clinging to your clothes. The bell above the gate sways in the breeze, though no one rings it now. It doesn't need to. The rhythm of the city hums softly on its own. Somewhere far below, a baker closes her shutters. A gardener gathers herbs for the evening stew, and the sound of distant laughter ripples through the alleys like gentle rain. The siege that lasted forever has become nothing more than a lullaby, whispered between walls. You pause at the parapet one last time. The sea glimmers faintly in the moonlight. The wind carries echoes of all those who once stood watch here, soldiers. Scribes, gardeners, children. They murmur quietly, not words of command or defiance, but of rest. If you listen closely, you can still hear the faint ringing of that chipped bronze bell somewhere beyond time steady, patient, endlessly kind. It doesn't summon armies anymore. It calls only for quiet. So let that sound settle in your chest as you breathe slower, softer. Let the city fade into dreamlight, its gardens overgrowing its ramparts, its streets warm with the glow of peace. Remember, Dot, you have survived the siege of patience, my friend. You have walked through centuries of waiting and found that the gentlest victory is simply to keep breathing. The bell doesn't ring tonight, but maybe that's the truest sound of all. Dot, end of script. Sweet dreams.